This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome in, everybody. It is Sports Daily. It is Jacob Albracht and Tommy Castor, Chad Chambers producing for you today. The IHOP hotline is open for you to get in touch with the program, 869-1240. You can also tweet at us here at Sports Daily or at Tommy or I individually. We are available. We appreciate you listening on KFH, listening over the stream on the Odyssey app. And we appreciate those looking at us on our video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all available for you as we make our way through the midweek edition of the program today. Glad to be with you. The Aftershocks can't get it done. They hung in there for a while, and then things kind of got away from them there late in the fourth quarter. Team Heartfire was good. We knew they would be good, and they just played better last night, quite frankly. But another nice run for the Aftershocks, record-setting crowd there at Koch Arena, which is always great to see. Love seeing that. So kudos to fans for getting out there and making a July 26th, 25th event a lot of fun. So you got the big crowd. I'm sure the TBT will be back, and I'm sure the Aftershocks will be back as well. A lot of NFL news today, some clarity on a couple of Chiefs situations. But, Tommy, it's a busy time of year. We're back in the swing, back in the groove here.
Yeah, we are.
And, Tommy will get his microphone working here. He had just a technical issue there. A couple other of the headlines that we'll get into today. Justin Herbert makes the next big NFL quarterback splash. 5 years, $262.5 million. We're sort of waiting on Joe Burrows. And then I think when that gets done, we'll probably get to Patrick Mahomes at some point. But the Chiefs have other business to attend to as they need to get Chris Jones done. We get clarity on the Kadarius Toney situation. Sean Payton chimes in on gambling as he lost a player there in Denver for a while, and a lot more. All right, Tommy, now we got you. How are you this week?
I'm back now. I'm good. Hey, it's good to be here today, middle of the week. I know that we're in the middle of this heat wave going on right now with no end in sight, so hopefully everybody is able to stay safe and cool as the week goes on. It's always difficult when you look at the 7-day forecast and there's literally no end to the way that this is all playing out right now with the hot weather and humidity and all of that. We got a ways to go, I think, before we get out of this. So, like I said, hopefully everybody stays cool today.
Yeah, it's going to be a while. We'll give away some HTO later in the show to help you cool off as well in just a little while. As the discounts keep rolling in this week over there. If you want to get some merch, I should have worn a shirt for you. The merch is like 50% off for the next 2 days. If you need any HTO merch. So, it is hot. It is a scorcher. It's going to be a scorcher for a while, and we're going to continue to follow training camp. And I don't know how hot it is in St. Joe, but some of these camps, this could become a factor. Most teams try to find places that are a little cooled off. Not the Chiefs. They want to sweat it out a little bit at camp, and they won't have Kadarius Toney probably for camp, Tommy, as Andy Reid confirms yesterday. So Travis Kelce was right in all of that confusion. And it sounds like Tuesday morning, Kadarius Toney had a surgery. He's got a knee issue, and he had a surgery to clean that up. That's what he tweaked. And I think he had a procedure done in the offseason too. So this is pretty serious here. And, Andy Reid hopes that he'll be back for the start of the regular season. Basically confirming the worst end of the news. Is so strange early in the week. You get Travis Kelce, makes it sound super serious. Everybody freaks out. Then Adam Schefter's like, well, it's not that serious. Not quite so bad. And then it just sort of went back and forth. And Toney was like, yeah, the report's not right. Well, apparently they were. Andy Reid confirming that surgery. With a history like Toney, and I'm sure Toney understands this, it's a big red flag. And, he's a first round talent traded for a third round pick. And there's a reason for that. He's not, like a model citizen. He's not a bad citizen off the field, but he has some distractions baked into his equation, and he can't stay on the field. And so, that's a part of why he was let go by the Giants when he's as talented as he is. And we talked about this yesterday, Tommy, and I guess we'll get back into it because now we have the confirmation on the injury. I just wonder if the Chiefs don't have one and haven't been developing this backup plan. I mean, they have to know it's unlikely he's there the whole way. So it's almost like you don't envision, and if they did, I don't think they will anymore. You don't envision Kadarius Toney as this number one receiver, right? And we all know Travis Kelce is that, but you know what I mean, in the wide receiver room. I think you just treat him as like a bonus when he's there. Sort of like last year, honestly. Like he wasn't there much of the regular season. And then all of a sudden he's a weapon in the playoffs. And I think that, kind of an extra weapon is the way that we need to wrap our heads around what he'll be for the Chiefs until we see something different, which we never have thus far in his career. I think it's time to start looking elsewhere as what will lead the way in that wide receiver room. They spent more high draft capital on a receiver again. That probably should have told us this, Tommy. Like, why did they go out and draft Rashee Rice pretty early there? Probably because they didn't have any confidence that Toney would be able to play all the way through. So now it's, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, some of the veterans they have in there. And then Kadarius Toney, when you have him, is this great weapon you can utilize however you want.
Yeah, I have a really hard time believing that the Chiefs were caught off guard by this with Kadarius Toney. I mean, maybe the fact that he got injured in the very first practice, but I mean, come on, they know his injury history. They know, kind of the way that he has been basically at best a part-time player in his NFL career. So I know that they acquired him with the thought that, the ceiling could potentially be high. And if he stayed on the field, the talent level is there to reach that ceiling, and the reason why he was drafted 20th overall by the New York Giants a few years ago. That being said, that they have developed a backup plan, or at least understood that there needed to be some kind of contingency in the event that Toney is not available. And, so if they're not going to have him through training camp, if they're not going to have him through preseason, if they're not even going to have him for the first few weeks potentially of the regular season, then I know that they have been working on a backup plan for a while. I think you have to do that when you've got talent at that level that is that injury prone. You have to always go into it thinking, what is our contingency if this doesn't work out and Toney is not available? One of my big questions with Kadarius Toney, and this is something that I heard that Nate Taylor brought up on a radio interview yesterday, is what is the importance potentially of bringing Kadarius Toney back early in the season? Like maybe you just shut him down until midway through when the Chiefs are trying to make a playoff push. They're trying to win a division and they're trying to get back to the Super Bowl. So Nate Taylor from The Athletic obviously has written some articles, a lot of articles about the Chiefs. And he basically mentioned, I think the target date that he put in his mind, as long as Toney is available and healthy by Halloween, then at that point you feel good about it, at least in his mind. So I wonder, and I don't think that the Chiefs would just flat out shut him down until that time. But I do agree that there is a level of importance later in the season to have him available than the first few weeks of the year.
I don't think I agree with that because he's a young receiver. It's not like he's some veteran that has all this tread on the tail. He's 24 years old. Like at some point, if you're the Chiefs, you have to think about the present and the future and see if there's any chance this guy has staying power. And I don't think you baby a 24-year-old wide receiver. I think you go, because if it doesn't work, they're going to just move on anyway, right? Like you can't plan this way. I think that they have had a contingency the whole time. And the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, right? Richie James, who, they bring in Richie James, and if everybody's healthy, you look at the roster and you're like, well, is he even going to make the team? Well, I think the Chiefs are being realistic with the situation. They spend more draft capital on Rashee Rice. They did last year on Sky Moore. They're trying to get versatile and young in that room. Justin Ross has been a project now for a couple of years. They already have Watson. They have all these pieces and these guys. And Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They're okay without Kadarius Toney. And so I don't think you baby him. I think when he's ready to go and he's cleared, you play him because you got to know, like, is this guy a part of our future or is this just never going to work for him? Because if it's not, that allows you to move on. You can't have a guy on the roster that you spent a third round pick on that you can't put on the field. If it's not going to work, you let him go. Like, it's hard to keep roster spaces. It's hard. It's just hard to plan, right? It's hard to prepare and be ready when you have this floating player of like, oh, well, maybe he'll be able to play. Maybe he won't, but that's a hard thing to do. Now, I think they've done a good job being ready in this inevitability, but I don't think you can afford to baby it. I think you got to let him go when he's ready to go and just see what happens. This is, a little bit different than some of the other stuff that's plagued him. This is a knee injury that was re-aggravated. It's not a hamstring or it's not a whatever. It's not a he doesn't want to be out there. This is a pretty physical injury. So, I just don't think they don't need to just like close the book or anything like that. But I also don't think they need a baby. Like, he's a young player. Like, see if he can go. If he can't go, fine. But I mean, you spent a third round pick on him. Like, you might as well see what you got there.
We've seen other wide receivers in the NFL picked in the third round and later that have blossomed into great wide receivers over the years, and so I'm going to be curious. And of course, you can never know this, but it would make me wonder if this Kadarius Toney experiment ends up being a failure and he's not going to be able to make it and stay healthy and whatever. Would the Chiefs have been better off keeping that draft pick and using it for another wide receiver or for another position in need, as opposed to giving it away to the Giants, and taking Kadarius Toney? Now, I do know that even in the short period of time that he was with the Chiefs last year, he made an impact. He changes the game when he's on the field, and he was a huge reason why the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. Got a touchdown pass, had the big punt return, so there was definitely value in the Chiefs acquiring him last season. But if you're going to give up a third round pick to bring him in, you're going to be expecting that you can use him more than just in a handful of games in one season. You want to be able to utilize him across multiple years. And so I don't know. I really don't. To me, it's going to come down to how long he's out and really the way he comes back from this injury. Anytime there's a knee injury, makes you nervous, right? Makes you nervous that it could be a lot more severe than maybe what we know. Sounds like he re-aggravated that same injury, and they actually did surgery yesterday to go in and clean up cartilage. That doesn't just sound like you're dinged up, right? Like that sounds a little bit. Yeah, it sounds a little bit more than that.
I mean, when you're talking about he might not be ready for the regular season, Tommy, the regular season's like 5 weeks away. Like, if this was, if this was an injury in season, he's missing 5 weeks, right? No, it's a very serious injury. And I'm okay. I think third round pick was probably appropriate risk level for the upside. I'm totally fine with that. I don't think it was a wasted trade. It wasn't a wasted trade because he absolutely did help him win a Super Bowl. But even without that, I think it was an appropriate risk. I didn't have an issue with that because the other option was they were considering going to spend even higher draft capital, right, on a bigger name receiver. And I think what they did was just fine. I do think, though, as we've watched this now, they have absolutely been preparing for the risk involved. I think it's why they drafted Rashee Rice. I think it's why they brought in Richie James. I don't think, if you feel like Kadarius Toney is locked and loaded, unless, at a regular basis for a wide receiver, I don't know that you do one of those two things. You probably certainly don't do two of them because you wouldn't need to. But it was smart, right? Like, it was the right thing to do because they know they're going to find themselves in this situation. So it's like it's a bonus when he's out there, just like it was last year, right? I mean, it was the same thing last year. It was a bonus when he was there. He made it by the playoffs, and that's probably what Nate Taylor's talking about. But you did spend a third-round pick on him. He does have as high an upside as any young receiver in football. So you might as well see if he can go. Like, when he gets back healthy and he's cleared to play, put him out there and see if he can play.
Yeah, I think the mindset has shifted now. And maybe it's always been this way for the Chiefs franchise, but at least my mindset has shifted now from here's the wide receiver room for Kansas City with Kadarius Toney as the number one wide receiver option. and then the depth chart falls into place behind him. Now, my mindset is, here's the Chiefs wide receiver room and the way that they're going to run their offense. And if you can get in Kadarius Toney, for some games and have him be involved when he's healthy, and that's a bonus, then okay, that's the way that it's going to be. But I'm done expecting Kadarius Toney to be out there and be not a contributor, but a consistent contributor week in and week out. I had hopes. I had hopes that, when they didn't get DeAndre Hopkins, I had hopes that, okay, Kadarius Toney is going to be able to stay healthy, stay on the field, and he can develop into a true, consistent number one wide receiver. And the mindset now for me is he's just going to be more of like a bonus guy when he can get out there.
Yeah, I think when we look at who's going to be the guy, it's Kelsey, obviously. So the Chiefs never have too much pressure on that, but it's going to be Sky Moore or Rashee Rice. Now, we haven't seen Rashee Rice. I didn't like scout him, so we'll see. But I think Sky Moore has the skill set to be a top guy, reliable guy. Now, what does that mean? Is he going to be putting up Jamar Chase numbers like a number one? No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody in the Chiefs offense will ever do that at wide receiver. But I do think as far as, leading the way on something like that, the Chiefs are fine because I think they have, some options there. And again, Kelsey makes all of this easy. The pressure is never on because Kelsey is that guy. Now, does this, the thought of Toney and Moore and Rice and all these guys out there with Kelsey moving around, getting Kelsey open, I suppose goes away a little bit. But they didn't have that last year. I mean, they were very much, the wide receiver room was far more traditional last year. It's still versatile even without Toney. Let's go to the IHOP hotline quickly here, 869-1240. Earl on the line. Earl, what's up?
Hey, just a quick comment. You use the word maybe mistake on Toney, but let me bring you back to 2015 when the Royals gave up some pretty good talent to get Johnny Cueto, right? And what did that translate into? Well, a World Series championship. So they did sacrifice a bit, but they brought that guy in for a specific thing. Now let's look at the Chiefs last year and their playoff run. During the Super Bowl, a punt return by our man was a huge play in getting our second Super Bowl win in a short amount of time. So even if that is his only contribution, he has paid for himself. He has done what he was supposed to do. And his one-legged hop in the playoff game before the Super Bowl, he made plays to enable a Super Bowl championship. And there's no guarantee, no matter what you do with a third-round pick, that anybody they drafted would have had as big of an impact on this last playoff run and making a few plays, not many, he only touched the ball 3 times in the Super Bowl, but his value was indelible and needed to get us over the hump there. So he may not be the long term. He may be fragile as glass, but look, he made some plays, got us another bowl. And, sometimes you do that when you're in a position to, hang another pelt on the wall.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but and I agree with you. Like nobody's going to look back and regret the trade, but I also think it's fair to point out the Chiefs' expectations for that trade are certainly been higher than him helping them for 3 games last year. 3 meaningful, whatever it was.
Sorry, I got to go with you here with Dr. Phil with using the but. Yeah, I heard what you said, but I didn't listen. Look, their expectations were and have always been to bring in players to help them make some plays to win championships. He did that. I don't know how if we get more out of him, my goodness, what a good bonus. But look, he did, and expectations for at least Chiefs fans, knowing that he's fragile and he's kind of a goofy guy, he's already met the expectations of being that little piece that we wanted to get us another Super Bowl. Now, anything else is gravy, man. And so, it will take for what he got there. And, he'll heal up, hopefully. And good Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise, he'll be on the field again this next year, making a few spectacular plays to help the Chiefs get Super Bowl number 3 in a short amount of time. 4 overall. So, Chiefs
Appreciate
Kingdom
it, Earl.
checking in. Bye-bye.
Yeah, appreciate it, Earl. I get it. I agree. I think, though, that we shouldn't set the expectation so low just yet. I think the expectation can still be for him to, do something. It doesn't matter when you look back, because obviously they got the Super Bowl. But as we look forward, I think the Chiefs would like to see this guy be a part of the team for a while. But the reality is they're good at what they do, and they've got a plan in place. I think that they kind of saw this coming, just like everybody else did, right? Like everybody saw this coming. Everybody knew this was the track record here.
And it's going to come down
Chiefs have backed it up a little bit.
It's going to come down to how long this recovery takes. If it lingers, if he re-aggravates it again, if he's not healing up properly, whatever that is. I don't know this. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I can envision a scenario where this drags out longer than anybody else anticipated. When you're dealing with the knee, all bets are off, So I think that ultimately that expectation for what Kadarius Toney could be, it's going to come down to how this particular recovery before the season even starts, how that goes on whether or not he can continue to be an impact player for the Chiefs or not.
Well, I mean, you've had Travis Kelce and Andy Reid now, hope, and maybe week 1. I'd say the chances of that are not good at this point, which, again, glass half full, getting those extra reps and responsibilities for the other guys probably isn't the worst thing in the world either, long-term for the Chiefs as we look at this season and seasons beyond. 869-1240, if you want to weigh in on that, the IHOP hotline. Some other Chiefs news around with Chris Jones. We've got Justin Herbert news, though, as the quarterback carousel of getting paid lots and lots and lots of money continues. We'll talk about that because I think it does pertain to Patrick Mahomes just a little bit when we return on Sports Daily. All right, welcome back in, everybody, to Sports Daily here on KFH, on the Odyssey app, on our video stream, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We appreciate however it is that you take in the program. It's a scorcher outside, Tommy. Let's help people cool off here just a little bit as we continue on with some NFL talk. Before we do that, it is the Christmas in July week at HTO, both East and West in Wichita. So 50% off of all the apparel. So the shirts, the hats, all the cool gear like that, 50% off today and tomorrow. And we'll get you a couple of free iced teas here to bring you in to either store of your choice, 13th and Tyler West, 21st and 127th East. It's like 1 billion degrees outside. If you haven't tried it, cool off with some iced tea. If you have tried it, well, congratulations. You'll get a couple of free ones on us here from Sports Daily. First caller to the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. Jad will get you cooled off. More than 25 flavors. You can go inside, try them all for free to HTO here in Wichita. Coming soon in Derby also, by the way. All right, Tommy, Justin Herbert gets the big deal, and it breaks records. And, that's no surprise. We assume that Joe Burrow will do the same thing. Burrow hasn't gotten his deal yet, has he? We assume Joe Burrow will do the same thing.
He's not.
And then after Burrow would be where I guess we see Patrick Mahomes slide in. Now, I don't know how that'll look. Mahomes, probably isn't going to get paid appropriate value to what he is, but may need to, in his own mind, sort of reset things to help quarterbacks of the future, which we know that's a fine line he has to balance. So we'll see how he does that. There was talk of that, and then it sort of simmered down a little bit. But I would think he waits till Burrow's done. There's just no urgency on the Mahomes thing. And, Chris Jones has far more urgency, and Patrick Mahomes would probably agree with that. But Justin Herbert is really interesting. So Justin Herbert breaks the record. Now, we see quarterbacks break these records all the time. But Herbert's one of these cases, Tommy, where it's absolutely warranted. The Chargers' faults have sort of clouded what Herbert should be seen as. I mean, they're really, if you're just looking at production on the field here, because obviously Mahomes and Burrow have had and had more success through their first 3 seasons as far as wins and losses and those things. But just numbers to numbers, I mean, Herbert's as good as we've ever seen. Most yards, most 300-yard passing games, only behind Marino in touchdowns. Like, this dude's having a historic start to his career, and it goes back to that old, our wins a quarterback stat. I think I fall yes, they are, but they're not everything. I still think Marino is one of the greatest of all time, even though he never got one, right? Herbert is a superstar. He is so dang good. And the Chargers have blown it, really, for the cheap years of his contract, and we'll see if they can adjust now to the expensive ones. But does Justin Herbert give the appropriate amount of, does he get, I should say, the appropriate amount of credit for the kind of start to his career he's had? I've told you before that I don't think Burrow does. I don't think Herbert does either.
Yeah, I don't think he does. Because I agree with you. I think that he is a great quarterback. I don't think he's a good quarterback. I think he's a great quarterback. And I think that he's going to be a quarterback that has a tremendous amount of success with his individual stats throughout the course of his career. And I think that's probably where it stops. The Chargers do not inspire any confidence in me that they can put a team around him that will provide a deep run into the playoffs, competing for championships. And the reason why I don't have any confidence in that is because they haven't done that for him so far. And they've spent a lot of money on players to be around him. I mean, think of guys like Joey Bosa that they brought in. They've got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. They brought in a lot of other big time names on that defense. And it really hasn't panned out for them as far as level of success with wins and losses. So if I'm Justin Herbert, and maybe this happened in the contract negotiations, I don't know, I wasn't in the room, but if I were him, I would have went through negotiations and said, yeah, I want to get paid. I want to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL for now, until these other guys get their deals. But it's also very, very important to me that I feel like this franchise has a solid plan to put our team in the best position possible. If I'm going to be locked up with this organization long term, I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on when you said that they weren't able to surround him with talent during the cheap years of his contract and enough to win a Super Bowl.
Right.
Now they've got to navigate with a large contract with Justin Herbert. So if I'm him, I've got to feel super comfortable that this franchise is going to do everything in their power for us to win.
I would feel good about that if I was Herbert. Now, they've gotten it wrong, but it's not been for lack of effort, right? When you talk about the Chargers and what they've done, they haven't gotten it right, but they have swung for the fences a lot. They were trying to, and I do think that matters to some degree. I think the effort matters. The coaching will be the interesting thing for Justin Herbert. I think Brandon Staley, we all wondered if they were going to make the move away and could you get Sean Payton out there and all those things from the offseason. That didn't happen. So I don't know what kind of relationship they have. I have no idea. But I know they drafted another wide receiver this year. And so they have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and now Quentin Johnston, who I love Quentin Johnston, by the way, who likely will just replace one of those two guys. So they're doing the things I think to make him happy. I'm fine. If I'm Herbert, I'm pretty happy there, I think. He's been off to this crazy start. So here's what else I wonder about, because I love to wonder about this stuff. I've told you before that I think Mahomes, I don't know if he'll get to the championships of Brady or close enough that we can sort of call him the GOAT, right? Like, because the GOAT's sort of reserved for that. But I do think that I'll say right now, I think Mahomes is the most talented quarterback we've ever seen play. Like, as far as just playing the position, he's the best we've ever seen and will be. I think that Burrow has a very good chance to enter that same conversation, right? I've said that before, and I think it gets backed up. The amount of success that Burrow has had through the same period of time as Patrick Mahomes is remarkable, right? He's basically a couple of plays in the Rams Super Bowl away from being on the exact same trajectory. Like, he's very, very, very close. I think when the dust settles, well, I wonder more about this. So I am certain on Mahomes. I think for Burrow, but I do wonder with Herbert, is Herbert also capable of entering that sort of conversation of like, when the dust settles 10, 15 years from now, will we think of Justin Herbert as one of the best that's ever played the position? Now, he's going to have to find success probably for that to happen. But I do think, Tommy, there's a real good chance statistically that he does enter that conversation and becomes a part of that. It's not like we've always had this many good quarterbacks at one time. We have a couple of times in the NFL where it's just really, really, really quarterback rich. We've had ebbs and flows of that. I do think we're in one. Some people would say Trevor Lawrence has that trajectory. I'm not anywhere near that. I think these are the three guys, and Josh Allen is a very still up in the air, maybe, as is like Jalen Hurts, right? Allen, if Allen can hold up physically, I think he'll have a pretty good shot. Hurts, I just need to see it for like one more year, and then I'll start to wonder that same thing. I think there's a ton of them, and I think it's good for all of us. And I know the game has changed, and it favors the quarterback a little bit more. But like, if we put these guys in a vacuum, they'd all be really good in any era they played in. Like, they're all so dang good. They all happen to play the AFC almost, but it's a great quarterback era in the NFL. And I think absolutely Herbert could get there where Mahomes is and Burrow ultimately, I think, will be.
The difference, though, between Justin Herbert and those two guys you just referenced is those two guys have won playoff games. And in the case of Mahomes, he's won a championship. Yep. Justin Herbert has never won a playoff game. And you know what? There are a lot of reasons that you can point at that are not because of Justin Herbert that they haven't won a playoff game. And his individual stats tell the story about how special of a quarterback he is and could potentially be. It's crazy to me. And when I say crazy, I don't mean I disagree with it, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that a guy gets $262 million without ever winning a playoff game. And so basically the Chargers are paying him based on, number one, his individual stats, and that's fine. But number two, paying him based on hope. They're hoping and they're wishing and they're praying that Justin Herbert can lead them to postseason success. That's the bottom line. That's the only reason why they're giving him that much money without him never winning a playoff game up to this point in his career. So that's on Justin Herbert's shoulders to take them to the next level, but it's also the responsibility of the franchise and the coaches on that team. Brandon Staley and now Kellen Moore is the offensive coordinator there. I don't know how that's going to go. He's got a ton of weapons around him. In theory, really, really good wide receivers and a fairly solid defense, I would say. They've got to get over that hump now that they're paying Justin Herbert that kind of money.
Yes, they do. Kellen Moore is probably the most significant thing that they did this offseason to see if that works. And, Justin Herbert's going to win playoff games. Whether or not he wins a Super Bowl, I have no idea. That's where it gets a little interesting. And when we talk about he's got to justify it by doing X, Y, or Z, I don't think he's got to justify anything. I think the Chargers are lucky to have him. Kyler Murray got paid, right? You just have to pay your quarterbacks. The Chargers are fortunate, and they did a good job drafting him, that they have one that's actually really, really, really good. And at some point, I think could be in the mix for historically good. I think he could get there. He's put up more numbers than pretty much anybody ever.
Sure.
And that includes Mahomes and Burrow, by the way. Now, Mahomes is a little bit of a cheat code because he didn't play his first year, right? So that's kind of unfair. I think when we see those, and I would have to go back and look, but I think that's why that's not Mahomes. But Burrow, I think you could look at him. Burrow got hurt in his first year. So maybe it's not totally fair to those two guys. But Herbert's durable. He's got everything you want. Good leader, all that stuff. I want it to work for him because I enjoy watching him play as much as I enjoy watching any of these guys play.
Wasn't there that game last season? He had broken ribs and he's still just going out there and just slinging it around. He is durable.
Made that throw. There was that one throw right after where you were just like, there is no way I'd be dead right now. And he just launched that missile. Holy cow. All right, let's come back. We'll continue. What does it mean for Mahomes and the Chris Jones situation that, Herbert now just reset the market again? We'll get into that with Sports Daily. 869-1240, the IHOP hotline's open. We'll be right back right after this. All right, welcome back in, everybody, to Sports Daily. It's Albracht and Castor. Glad to be here with you on this Wednesday. Andrew is watching us on our video stream right now, asks, with a little pop-up rain shower, what's a sport that you enjoy, follow, watch, but rarely discuss on Sports Daily? There are teams that we watch, enjoy, and follow that we don't discuss a whole lot, I think, on the show. That's an easy answer for me. It would be the Rangers. As far as sport, boy, Tommy, I'm a pretty traditional sports fan. I'm pretty much a football, baseball, basketball. That's all I got time for. I have a feeling I know the answer to yours. But
I don't think you do.
I would say
I don't think
hockey,
you
right?
do.
Just a little bit of
No.
hockey in there.
Well, I mean, that's my full-time job is
Right.
with the Wichita Thunder. But honestly, I'm not a major hockey fan. Like I
Right.
watch
At
our
the
games,
NHL
obviously,
level,
but
you
I'm
watch
not,
a lot of
I'm not
hockey.
watching NHL a whole lot. Yeah. Obviously golf. I mean, I'm a big golf guy. We talk about golf every once in a while, but honestly, this is really obscure. And my wife makes fun of me about it. There is nothing better that I enjoy than like on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning, turning on the TV to like the outdoor channel and watching fishing. And I don't really fish. Like I can fish. I just don't do it very regularly, but something about like those guys out on a lake and they're
Equate it to
typically
golf.
like middle-aged dudes and
It's
they're
similar to
they're
golf.
fishing. I just like sitting back and watching that. It's very calm, very peaceful, very relaxing. So my answer would probably be
I
fishing.
think a lot of that is probably the same reason you like golf. And
Yeah.
I don't watch that. I don't think there is one. I could come back to this if necessary. There are, when the Olympics come around, there are obscure Olympic sports I enjoy. I like curling. Like when we get to the Winter
Okay.
Olympics and you get like late night curling, I think it's cool. I love shuffleboard, right? So curling. I like to play pickleball. Pretty sure I would never watch it. I'm not a tennis guy, not a soccer guy, not an auto racing guy. So I don't know that I really have one, to be honest. Mine would be more
Okay.
of teams, but no, I pretty much watch football, baseball, basketball, and that takes me through most of the year. The TBT, but of course we talk about that as the Aftershocks lose last night. But we do talk about the TBT a lot, but I've really grown to enjoy that. High school sports, not specifically a sport, but we obviously with work, I watch a lot of high school sports. We don't talk a ton of high school sports here. We do some when there's great athletes and those kinds of things. And when we get into that portion of the season and we try to
Are you a poker guy? Do you watch the World Series of poker?
You know what? I did love to watch poker. I don't as
Yeah.
much anymore. I love to play poker, and I did love to watch poker. So when I played a lot of poker, I watched a lot of poker because I think you can learn, right? And so that's a good one. I there will be a point in time, probably soon, that I will try to get to playing poker like once a week again. Our family loves to play cards. Like when we go home in my like everybody, kids, grown-ups everywhere. Like my dad was teaching us to gamble and play poker when we were little, right? Like everything was a bet. Like I'll bet you can't do that. Or, I remember on the golf course one time, speaking of golf, there was like a long putt. We were at like the par 3 course in town and I was grounded, I think, but I was playing golf with dad and I was like, if I make this putt, I'm ungrounded, that kind of stuff. Like,
yeah.
And of course it's like, all right, fine. I made that putt, by the way, maybe the best putt, greatest putt I've ever made in my life. But yeah, poker's a really good one, man. I love poker. And we have a casino right down the road with a great poker room. And I just don't have time for these things anymore. And at some point I'm going to play a ton of golf and poker. And
I played a lot of poker for a while, like in my single days, and really enjoyed it. I like watching the World Series of Poker. I got invited to a poker night not that long ago, and I went to it. I was able to make it work. And then they told me, yeah, we do this like, I think every week or every other week. We'd love to have you back. And in my mind, I'm like, there is no way my wife is going to go for this. Like, there's no way that I can just say, all right, every week I will be here to make that happen. But someday I'd love to get back into poker.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a mental exercise. I love going to Vegas and jumping in a poker tournament. It's hours on end, but it's fun. It's exhilarating. It's nerve-wracking. you make friends with the most random people at the poker table. It's cool. That's a good one. But thanks for the question there, Andrew. As we make our way through here. All right, we'll come back now. We'll get into our first full segment of the second hour, and we'll kind of bring this Herbert thing into the radar of Patrick Mahomes and what that potentially could mean for Pat and how it relates, of course, to Chris Jones. And it's all sort of tied hand in hand. There's a little reporting on Chris Jones yesterday. And again, it's probably all just semantics from the bargaining, but we'll get into all of it as we make our way through. We'll look a little closer at the aftershocks and their loss, but a great atmosphere for them as well coming up in the second hour. Your calls to the IHOP hotline, 869-1240, or you can leave us comments on our video chats. We'll have some Wind Surge tickets to give away. Congratulations to our HTOT giveaway winner. We'll have it all coming up for you in hour number 2 of Sports Daily right after this.
Live sports radio 24/7. This is 97.5 and 1240 KFH. Jacob Albracht, Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome back in, everybody, to Sports Daily. It's Jacob Albracht and Tommy Castor here with you on this Wednesday edition. We will have some Win Surge voucher giveaways coming up later in this hour. We'll talk about the TBT a little bit as the Aftershocks do not advance to the Final Four. Still a great showing, and a great showing by Shocker fans and basketball fans last night at Koch Arena. Attendance records for that tournament. They continue to set their own record and break their own record, and it was another great year of the TBT here in Wichita. Some other big news today as we congratulate Mark for his win of our HTO giveaway there in hour number 2. Stay cool, Mark, and everybody out there. Hopefully some HTO will help you do that. But Justin Herbert's contract is interesting to me, not just because it's another big quarterback getting paid, because I think it probably has something to do with what will happen with Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes' contract situation is going to be an interesting one. There doesn't seem to be any urgency. There was maybe some perceived and fake. It wasn't urgency that it was implied in that report in the offseason. There was just more of like a guess that it would get done before the start of the season. I think there's almost no chance that happens now because I think, one, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Mahomes to go before Burrow. And two, they got to figure out what they're going to do with Chris Jones. It was Florio that reported yesterday from Pro Football Talk that this could last a while, which he admitted means, of course, it could happen like tomorrow, because that's, when you get that stuff, it's agents or front office executives trying to, leverage a little bit. And they do that through national reporters all the time. But I don't know what the answer is. I would put the chances of them not bringing back Chris Jones and him being there for the start of the regular season as very low. But I think it's on the table. I think everything's on the table. They have a difficult decision to make with Chris Jones if he wants $30 million a year at 29 years old. And I do think that's why we're not going to see anything from Mahomes until that's settled. Like, if I'm Brett Veach, unless, here's the only caveat to that, Tommy, and this is what gets interesting. What if Mahomes' deal could somehow free up the money to offset the Chris Jones deal? That's where it gets like, chicken and egg a little bit, but man, that seems unlikely that could happen.
So Chris Jones has held out since training camp started. We're in day number 4. So we're talking $200,000 in mandatory fines so far for Chris Jones. And those are not fines that can be waived. I mean, the only way that Chris Jones is going to get out of paying it is if the Chiefs say, in your new contract extension, we'll cover the cost of that. But they can't just let it go away. Like, that's a mandatory fine that, for him holding out over the last 4 days. And, barring some kind of extension, that number will continue to grow. So that's another part of this also that I find really interesting. How big will Chris Jones allow this number to get? And I know that there are players out there that I think they call it holding in, like they'll report to training camp, but they won't do anything. I've even heard of players that will report to training camp to avoid the fine, maybe even fake an injury and then set out so they're not getting fined. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to kind of get around this. But right now, Chris Jones has not shown up to training camp. That's $200,000 in mandatory fines out of his pocket. And again, I think that number will continue to grow because I don't see an extension happening, anytime soon, unless these conversations are accelerating behind the scenes and both sides are feeling a sense of urgency to get it done. Going back to your question about what happens with Mahomes versus Chris Jones, I think it comes down to how urgent does it feel from Patrick Mahomes himself? Because that's really going to dictate this entire thing. If Patrick Mahomes says, okay, now I'm ready, like, let's go ahead and get it done, then they need to get it done. If Patrick Mahomes says, okay, we need to free up money to make a Chris Jones deal happen, and I'm going to make it very clear to the front office that this is a priority for me, then at that point they'll get it done. But if those things are not happening, then I think it's very unlikely we're going to see a deal for Mahomes ultimately open up money for Chris Jones.
Number one, I don't think Mahomes does that or would do that.
He's done that before, though. Keep in mind. I mean, he has he's converted
no.
salary
I mean, put an ultimatum on the front office. Yeah,
right.
He would totally.
But he has converted, parts of his deal in the past
absolutely
to free up money for other people. Like, that's happened. So it would take that for a Mahomes deal to get done before Jones.
I think they can probably do it with Jones's contract in and of itself, but they do sort of need to work in tandem, because it's going to, again, when we talked about Jones's, desire being much higher than everybody thought, that alters a lot of plans for the front office for other guys. So, you have to, if you're going to get there with Jones, you now have to alter what you do 2 and 3 years from now. So the Mahomes piece of it can help you do that. Like, if you can work them together, then maybe you can still get the things done that you want to get done 2 and 3 years from now that really hurt you 4 years from now or 5 years from now instead of 2 or 3. I mean, that, it's sort of, you're going to have to, take your medicine at some point on this.
Oh, for sure.
There's going to be a detriment to other places on the roster. The evaluation piece for the Chiefs has to come in. Chris Jones is 29, and we want to make sure this offensive line is taken care of. I would honestly guess that making sure that can still happen would take priority when you have Mahomes there, of making sure those guys don't walk. They just invested in Juwan Taylor. You'll have a chance to, to lock up Humphrey and Trey Smith. And my guess would be that would, even over Chris Jones, just because it's Mahomes, take some priority as Mahomes gets older. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I would guess that that's the case. They're not going to be as expensive as Chris Jones. But I think if you had to, if you had 2 options, you only had A or B, and you're Brett Veach, and you're only presented these 2 options, and it's sign Chris Jones, but it costs you Humphrey and Trey Smith down the road, or lose Chris Jones now, but it ensures you keep Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey down the road, I think you'd take option B. And it's not that simple. I'm just saying, so whatever happens, I think they're going to try to make sure B happens, even if they make A happen at the same time. And Mahomes' deal could help that, I think, based on everything we've heard from Mahomes publicly, in that, A, there's no urgency on his deal. But now it lies in, I do think he's going to want to wait on Burrow, because he does have this pressure from other guys at the position where he does need to reset it to some degree. So there's some pressure on Mahomes to let the Burrow deal happen too.
And I've heard people that have said, in regards to Chris Jones, have him, don't sign him to a long-term extension. Have him play this year, or if he holds out, I think that's unlikely, but eventually he would probably play, would be the thought. Let him play out the final year of his contract, then place the franchise tag on him, and essentially you've got 2 more years of Chris Jones. The issue with that, the franchise tag for Chris Jones would be like $34 million. So the leverage is completely on Chris Jones' side, because the Chiefs would end up paying more.
I'd rather
on
have
the
him
franchise
for 34. I would. Here's what
Seriously?
I would rather have. Oh yeah, I'd rather have him for a year or 2 years at 34 than 4 years at 30. No,
and have him be
question about it.
disgruntled and unhappy the entire time.
Well, he's not going to do it. No, I'm not saying that that's going to. Yes, because he would be upset. He'd be very mad. And the other reality is, he has made some money in his career. He could absolutely hold out. He could be like, nope.
I think that's unlikely, just because of the window that he has to still be a viable defensive player in the NFL. I mean, it'd be different if he was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years younger. You could maybe afford to really threaten to hold out and not play the final year of your contract. I think you could do that and be taken seriously. I'm not sure that would happen with Chris Jones, because the thought would be, how many more good years does he have left, right? And so I think you hold out, you're losing one of your prime earning
That's
years.
the problem, but that's the problem for the Chiefs. And again, I've said from the beginning, like I don't that the per year doesn't concern me as much as the number of years. Like if it's a 3-year deal, I'm probably comfortable with that risk level, but 4 years, I just don't know. And I'm telling you, Chris Jones is one of my favorite players in this league, and I think he's in the conversation as a top 5 most disruptive, influential defensive player in this league. Like I could not think more highly of Chris Jones, but I don't think the Chiefs have a very unique situation. There aren't a lot of teams that get this, right? They've had players take discounts. Not everybody gets that. But their window is so much longer and is for so much longer than like anybody else because they have this quarterback. I mean, think about the window. Like truly think about how big the window was for, let's say, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, right? Or Tom Brady in New England. Or Ben Roethlisberger may not be as good of an example, but, for a lot of years, he was a great example. And Drew Brees, like when you have that quarterback that's always going to give you a chance, your window's always open, right? Like your window's always there. So if the window's always open and there's no need for desperation, that's what the Chiefs bring to the table, right? They don't have any desperation whatsoever to make it. That's what makes it easier for them to make hard decisions. Because there is no desperation. As long as they have 15 and they can protect him, they're going to have a chance to win a Super Bowl. Like, no matter who's on the roster. I mean, we've seen that before. Aaron Rodgers before last year, right? You felt like always had a chance. Peyton Manning, except for the year, where he wasn't very good and they ended up winning a Super Bowl anyway. Like, you always felt like you had a chance with Peyton Manning. You've always felt like you had a chance with Tom Brady. Like, there are only certain guys that do. The Chiefs have one of those. So they don't have to be desperate anywhere. And that's where I think, Chris Jones has to be. Chris Jones doesn't have to do anything. Chris Jones can do whatever he wants. But the Chiefs don't have to do anything, right? Like they can just sit there and evaluate. I'm sure they have to reevaluate. It's not that dissimilar to the difficult decision that I'm sure they didn't want to make with Tyreek Hill, but they had to. Like it didn't make sense for what else they wanted to do. Now, I would contest that Chris Jones was a part of the reason they didn't re-sign Tyreek Hill, right? Like the fact that they didn't give Tyreek Hill the deal was probably so they could make sure they kept Chris Jones. But we keep saying that with Chris Jones. How many years have we said that with Chris Jones? Like, it'll get taken care of. They're trying to make sure. And here we sit now with a holdout in hand, with no end in immediate sight, with a lot of guys on this roster that have got to get paid. They're already going to have to make tough decisions. And if they do this with Jones, that just adds to it. And I don't know, I can't quantify because I'm not a cap guy, like what potential casualties come because of it. But if it's either of those offensive linemen, I don't think the Chiefs are going to want to do that. Now, if it maybe is Willie Gay or McDuffie down the road or Snead, I think he's probably gone anyway. Then you've got some things to think about. And they have drafted defensive linemen in the first rounds of the last 2 drafts.
I agree with you to an extent that there is no desperation as far as the Chiefs are concerned right now, except for the fact that clearly they were caught off guard that this is happening. Clearly they thought that they were closer with Chris Jones. I even think privately, because
they better not have been caught off guard. If they only on Monday,
if they only
on Monday learned that Chris Jones wanted $30 million.
I'm not saying right. Yeah,
Chris
I'm
Jones
not saying as recently as this week, but I mean, maybe going back a couple of months. I think they were, because if they knew that there was going to be an issue like this, don't you think that they would have built in some contingency plans at defensive tackle? Like, I know they drafted Keandre Coburn in the 5th round, but it's a 5th round pick. And maybe he will develop into a really good player. I don't know. But if they felt like it wasn't going to work with Chris Jones, or maybe maybe ultimately it would work out, but there was going to be some tension, and really, who knows? You might have wanted to spend a little bit of higher draft capital to go and get somebody to potentially, if needed, replace him. And then if that never happened, then you've got somebody who can develop behind him. But I mean, really, the Chiefs, we've talked about this before. They don't have really any impactful players at that position behind Chris Jones. So that would lead me to believe that all along the organization thought, oh, we're going to get something done with Chris Jones. It's going to be really easy. And we're going to have him locked in for a number of more years down the road. We don't even need to think about having, somebody in the pipeline to replace him potentially. So that's what would lead me to believe that they might have been caught a little bit off guard, that this was going to be the situation that they were in. I'm not honestly that concerned about what happens at that position long term, because I think that they can draft a replacement and do all of that in the future. I just don't know what this year is going to look like because they have no depth.
Trying to look at when Aaron Donald signed his deal. I think he was a little younger than Jones is now when he signed that mega deal. The only thing I can think of is maybe Chris Jones's camp thought Quinnen Williams would get more. That could make some sense, right? Like that they thought that number would be bigger and closer, and it's not. And so that's where we've got this like, well, crap. Well, you know what? We're going to ask for what we're going to ask for anyway. Forget Quinnen Williams. Here's what we think we want. I think that I do think it'll get done. I think the holdup here is going to be the length. I don't think it's the per year. Maybe it is, but that just seems easier to navigate than the length.
If the holdup is the length, then if that is like, it's not about the money, it's not about what they're paying him, then maybe in their minds, the best option is to test a holdout this year and then franchise tag him.
I mean, it might be the best option on the field to put the pressure back on Chris Jones. Chris Jones has been such a good and model member of this franchise. I don't think anybody wants it to go there.
You're going to burn that bridge.
If you're talking about strictly a business decision, Tommy, I would say that that's probably the best way to go. Right?
Wow.
Like I because then it's a 1-year deal. And look, if Chris Jones continues to play at that level, he's going to make a ton of money on those franchise tags. It's not like the running backs. Like you get paid gobs and gobs of money. We've seen this happen with quarterbacks. These franchise tag, you make just a big, massive number for a year, and then you go back to it. We've seen it at other positions. It would almost certainly disgruntle Jones. But in 2 years, are you that worried about that? Again, cutthroat business decision.
Look, keep in mind, this would not be the first time that Chris Jones has had the franchise tag placed on him from Kansas City. It happened back in 2020. They placed the franchise tag on him, and then they ultimately came together and they signed an extension. But it's happened before. It was the non-exclusive tag.
Isn't it too late for that,
though? But they
tagged
tagged him for that.
Can they still tag him?
Yeah.
Isn't it too late in the offseason to tag him?
Well, they can't tag him this year. He's under contract. Like he'd have his final year of the contract. It would be at the end of next year. So that's where it comes into play. Does Chris Jones have the appetite? If that were to happen and the Chiefs say, look, man, you want a 4-year deal? We just can't go that 4th year. Like we'll do 3, but we can't go that 4. And if that's a sticking point for Chris Jones, then at that point, does Chris Jones say, I'm not going to play my final year of the contract? And I don't know I don't know if he's got the appetite to do that.
At that point, did the Chiefs trade him?
Right.
I mean, that's an option. And I know people don't want to hear that.
I don't trade him now. You trade him right now, right before the preseason. What kind of value are you going to get back? I think you would get a good amount of return back, but you're not getting, more than likely, you're probably not getting anybody that can directly impact you right away.
Totally. No.
You're going to get draft picks and things like that.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get a whole lot of return right now.
No, you will not help yourself this year if you trade Chris Jones, but you could help yourself down the road. They'd get a big package for Chris Jones if they traded him. It'd get at least 1 first, if not, a first, a second, or whatever. I don't think anybody wants it to get to that. I don't think Chris Jones wants it to get to that.
No.
So you hope that these conversations can just happen peacefully and get resolved. Remember this, if you're concerned like we are, because we both really like Chris Jones and think he's unbelievable, just remember how quickly the Tyreek Hill situation got to the point it did. Like there are reports that was like it within days. Like he saw the Adams contract, said, I want more. And they said, no, we're going to trade you. Boom, boom, boom. Like days, like quickly, no thought put into it whatsoever. Tyreek Hill has had off the field troubles, obviously, but I think inside the locker room and for the fan base was a very valued member of the organization, right? Chris Jones doesn't have any of that off the field and also is that. I think if the Chiefs were going to go down the road of that sort of cutthroat decision, there is precedent in Tyreek Hill that happened real fast, right? Like they were like, nope, we're done with that. He's on the market, everybody. Now they did that before the draft, but so I don't think that's where they'd like to go either. I think that'd be like the last, probably if you had to power rank their ideas for how this works and resolves itself out, that'd probably be the last option. I think they want to get the deal done. I think it probably has more to do with length of the deal. And now with the Herbert deal, it makes me wonder, what does the Mahomes contract extension that will ultimately come at some point, how does that factor in? I don't think Mahomes inherently prevents them from signing Chris Jones. I think the opposite. I think there's a chance. How does Mahomes help you sign Chris Jones? And can that be put into play here to also help you at least keep the offensive linemen that need to be re-signed?
Man, I'll tell you right now, if Patrick Mahomes is involved with his own contract to free up money to sign Chris Jones, I mean, you're talking about maybe the most selfless quarterback of all time with his own money, right? Like in a world where you've got guys like Lamar Jackson and his contract demands, and then all these other quarterbacks that are demanding all this money. If Patrick Mahomes, and I'm not saying that he's going to do this, but if he goes to Brett Veach and says, "We need to have Chris Jones, we need to have him long term. What can I do to free up money to make it happen?" It's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that.
We have. Tom Brady did it a lot. Tony Romo did it with the Cowboys.
But
Those
to
two
that
jumped on
level,
it. Oh yeah, yeah. They restructured quite a bit. Brady and Romo did. Now, and I think I know I'm forgetting about one. There's been an in the the path to doing that is pretty similar to Mahomes. It's always been like off the field, heavily endorsed. I don't know if Peyton Manning did it. I can't remember. But I wouldn't be surprised. It's the guys that have careers outside of football, basically, like that are very obvious and going to be very fruitful that have done it. But Mahomes is not going to make the most money he makes over his lifetime as a football player. I don't think. Right? It will all come in other places. Like it's going to come. We haven't even scratched the surface. I mean, we know he's got like Adidas and Oakley and Coors Light, and he's part owner of the Royals and the KC Current.
Yeah.
And he if he wants it, he'll have a broadcasting opportunity in the aftermath. Like all of these things are going to be on the table for Mahomes. So yeah, it's an easier decision for him than some other quarterbacks that don't have that luxury of what they'll do after their playing days are done. But the timing of this, when we see the Herbert deal, is interesting as it pertains to Chris Jones. I hate imagining a world without 95 in the middle of that Chiefs defense this year.
Me too.
But I don't think it's out of the question. I don't. Again, I still don't think it's likely. I'd still think it's more likely they get him, but it's on the table, and that kind of sucks. 869-1240 is the number to call. What do you think, Chiefs fans? We'll come back. We'll hit on the TBT a little bit. Some of the other sports stories rotating around the world here as we take you through this Wednesday. It's Albracht and Castor at Sports Daily. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody. Sports Daily. Sean Payton, not happy about the NFL's gambling policy. Says shame on us after all these suspensions. Said it's basically the league's fault for not being more clear on how this works. Look, I don't know what the league is telling players. I think the league does have a responsibility to make sure that players are doing the right things as they partner with, these gambling sites. I am sort of over, the league being lectured by people saying you can't hold your players accountable and have these partnerships with betting sites. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Yes, the league can have these partnerships because it is a massive part of the reason the league is so successful. It is a future reason why the league will remain successful. And it is totally okay to tell your players, but you don't get to do it. Those are the rules. Like, it's not like the league doesn't need to get lectured on this. I'm sorry, coaches. Do a better job telling your players, guys, you can't do this. Like that. And the league deserves responsibility. And like, they've got to do the same thing. But stop lecturing the league about like partnering with these sites. Like, be realistic about this. There is now technology and all these things, and there are inherent risks. But a massive reason, Tommy, that the NFL is so successful is because it's the most fun sport to bet. Let's be real about that. It's the absolute truth. So, Sean Payton, while you're cashing those big old checks, you might as well get over, and everybody else lecturing the league on being partners with these sites, because that's part of the reason you get paid so much.
I don't know. I think that's a little unfair. I think that it's a little bit more of like, do what I say, not what I do, from the league. It's kind of duplicitous in my mind, just because of the fact that they are profiting so much money from betting. And I get it. And I'm totally on board with it. And it has improved the fan experience. It has opened up so many different avenues for fans. But there have been multiple reports that the NFL has done a poor job in educating the players and the people in the league to make sure that they understand the risks behind that. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that it can, significantly damage the game and the integrity of the game if you've got players that are involved in this, right? Like, I will never disagree with that. But if you are trying to hold players to a standard, but you're not really educating them on that standard and they don't know, I mean, like, there were so many different like little rules in place that players said they had no idea about. Like, you can't bet on anything on the grounds of an NFL team's facility. They didn't know that. They're not betting on the NFL. They're betting on other sports, but they didn't know that they can't walk onto the premises of their practice facility or whatever, and just by being there, you can't place a bet on a baseball game or a basketball game. They didn't know that. And so maybe they're playing dumb, but I do think that the league does deserve criticism for saying, we're going to accept all this money, but we're not really going to educate the players on the risks with this and the things that they need to be doing. And then we're just going to suspend them when they break a rule that they didn't know that was in place.
They can do a better job of education. There's no question about that. It's no different than the substance abuse policies as it pertains to performance enhancing drugs, right? It is, I mean, this is an off-base comparison, but it would be like selling beer at the stadium, but telling players, you can't get hammered and drive home. They have rules against certain things all the time. Like, there are certain sacrifices you must make to be a player in this league, period. Like, that's the part of it. Okay. Like, that's just a part of the deal. You can bet as much as you want when you're done being a player. And no, you can't bet at the facility. And no, you can never bet on football. That should be obvious to everybody now. You cannot make an NFL bet, but you can't do any betting while you're at the facility because you just can't blend the two things. Sean Payton says, I know this. There's a handful of owners that are owning these problems. A player can't have a share of DraftKings or FanDuel. It's shameful, embarrassing. It's not embarrassing that a player can't have shares of the betting sites. There's nothing more important than the integrity of your league. Nothing. Now, there is something to say. Neither should coaches and probably owners. And I don't know if owners are allowed to have shares of those companies, but they shouldn't be allowed to either, because that integrity can go that far up too. Like, you could say owners are tanking or whatever. So I don't know if owners are allowed to have shares and players aren't. If that's the case, that is a little embarrassing.
I do think that you can make a connection that some of the contract money that players receive as part of their deals trickles down from the revenue that these teams are making from betting sites, right?
And that's the part of it I don't like. Like these coaches pretending like they're like they and players aren't benefiting from these partnerships in the NFL is very, very naive. Right? Like, of course you're benefiting from it. The salary cap keeps going up, right? Like it's not, I mean, come on now. Like everybody gets paid more because the league's making more money, and the league's making more money because of these partnerships. It's what the fans want. And when you're a player, you just don't get to do it. That's it. Like if I were a coach or a team, here's what I would do. I would say, guys, here's the deal. Don't bet on anything while you're playing. Okay. Just don't bet on anything. I know that sucks, and I know it's fun, and I know you guys want to play fantasy baseball and do all this stuff and have fun and bet on March Madness like the rest of us. But, man, you're making a lot of money. That's just going to have to be a rule here. There are companies in states where weed is legal, Tommy, that don't allow employees to smoke weed. Okay? It's just like, okay, like that's one of the things that you have to kind of do to work at this company and make lots of money. That's what I would do. I would say just don't ever bet on anything. It's don't ever. And Sean Payton, this was interesting. He said for him, it's like the gun policy. Like you don't bet anywhere you can't have a gun. Airplane, hotel, stadium, anywhere. That's a constitutional right. So it's a little bit different, right? It is a little bit different, but it's just, let's stop being naive to this. Like it's a part of it. It's going to be a part of it. And everybody in the league that plays or coaches or does anything else benefits from it.
Here's a perfect example. I work for a minor league hockey franchise. I am not allowed to bet on hockey. I had to sign a form saying that I would not wager on hockey. And I've never lost a minute of sleep about that at all. I signed it. Okay, no big deal. That's one of the rules. It's one of the requirements. I'm not allowed to do that because I'm an employee of a professional hockey franchise where there could potentially be ramifications towards the integrity of the game. Bottom line. And I signed it, and it's no big deal. It's kind of the same way. I mean, it's pretty similar. Like you have restrictions based on what you are doing. I'm sure that there are employers out there just in general that, probably say, hey, ex-employee, you are not allowed to bet while you're on the premises of the job because it's taking away from your job performance. Like that's just a rule we have. You cannot be on DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever while you're working, while you're clocked in. That's just a rule. You have to abide by that. So I think that it's okay for the NFL to put restrictions on the players. I'm never going to argue that, but they've got to consistently teach these players exactly what they can and can't do. And if they're going to allow exceptions, I mean, it'd be different if the NFL just had a blanket policy like you were talking about. No betting whatsoever. If you're a player, you can't do it on anything. If there was a blanket policy, that'd be easier to enforce and to police. But if you're going to have these exceptions, like you can bet on other sports, you just can't do it at the team facility or whatever, you've got to educate these players. And if those policies ever change, if the goalposts ever move, you have to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on.
Well, you can take it up and make it more clear the next time bargaining comes up. And there's clearly technology for these guys to get busted. Yeah, you just, and maybe some of that responsibility goes to the coaches. I don't know. The league can talk to players all the time about substance abuse and be very careful what you take as supplements and all these things that get players popped all the time. Across sports, like those mistakes happen all the time. I think as fans, what we've got to realize is it's just it is very similar to the substance abuse policy. Your players are at risk of getting suspended for this. I totally understand why they're at risk for getting suspended for this. I agree with them getting suspended for this because you can't have the integrity portion of what you do ever come into question. I don't think that the NFL's in any danger of that. Has anybody ever questioned that? You already have that issue in some sports with tanking. I think the NFL is the least privy to tanking. The Texans cost themselves the first overall pick by winning their last game of the season last year. Like, you almost tanking doesn't really happen in the NFL like it does in basketball or baseball. So the NFL, I don't think they're in any danger of that, but clearly, by what we're saying, they're not going to take any risks there because they know it's such a big piece of their business for the future. There's no question.
I would just be, I'd be an advocate, honestly, if it was just a flat out, no nonsense, blanket policy. If you're a player, a coach, a team employee, front office, whatever, you can't bet. You can't do it. And then that way, there's no misinterpretation of the policy. If somebody gets suspended, everybody knows damn well what that person did and that it broke the policy. And I think that's where it goes back to Sean Payton, who is talking about it being unfair and all this stuff. I think that there's a misunderstanding, and that might be the fault of the NFL. It might be the fault of the teams and the coaches and the players and all of that, not really paying attention. I don't know. But if you just had a blanket policy, one size fits all, then there can be no misunderstanding on what the policy actually is. And when somebody gets suspended, you're like, all right, they broke the policy. We all know what it is.
Let me be clear about this, and this is where I have the most issue. The most responsibility is on the players. It's not on the league or the coaches to educate the players. It's on the players to become educated. That period. Let's not place blame solely where it doesn't need to be. If you get suspended for gambling, the number one arrow of responsibility goes to you for breaking a rule that's in place. It is your responsibility to know the rules of your employment, period. Can it be better navigated and better policies to help? Sure, it can. But at the end of the day, the players own the most responsibility in making sure they don't break the rules of the league that they play in. They're employees of the league. You got to make sure you know what the rules are. I mean, that's, I don't know. It is watch. Just as an aside, I don't know if that picked up. Do you have you have one of these watches, right? These apps?
I actually looked at mine when I heard that because I thought it was mine for a minute.
Does it randomly just try to text what you're saying? It took that 4-minute conversation as I looked down and it had this novel typed up. Crazy town. But anyway, players are responsible. Yes, it can be better. Just, don't break the rules. Know what the rules are. Can the league do a better job of making sure everybody knows what those rules are? Yeah, but it's
sure.
The number one responsibility
100%.
goes to the players for knowing what those rules are. You play in the league. You got to know. You got to know, and it's not going away, and the league is not going to get more lax with those rules. If anything, they'll get more strict. 869-1240 is the number to call. We'll come back. On the way out here, let's give away some WinSurge vouchers. We'll give away a 4-pack. Courtesy of us here at Sports Daily and KFH. What you can do with those vouchers is pick any game you want to. They're really cool. You can go whenever is convenient for you. 4 of them to our first caller right now on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll talk about the aftershocks last night when we return on Sports Daily. Welcome back in to Sports Daily here on KFH. Jake Albracht, Tommy Castor, Chad Chambers producing for us, manning that IHOP hotline. Tommy, the Aftershocks could not get it done last night, unfortunately. They were very competitive, I thought, in that game, much more so than the final score indicated. It did get away from them at the end. They just couldn't, they never really did in the tournament either. They couldn't hit a lot of shots, and they were able to survive that, but it wasn't enough. And Team Heartfire was as good as, Fran Fraschilla, who follows all this stuff closely, said that they were. He had been high on them, all the way through. And that was a good team. They were well coached, 7,200 fans, and Wichita broke its own record, largest crowd in tournament history. They now own like the top, 7 of those crowds. 7,200 fans gets me so excited for Shocker basketball, Tommy. It's what makes this tournament fun. If they played this tournament every year and all the same things existed and fans weren't showing up like this, it wouldn't be as much fun. Absolutely, the best thing about it is that people show up and get into it, and that makes it fun. And kudos to everybody for doing that. And aw shucks for the Aftershocks. They almost got back to that Final Four, and I think they'll continue to be there in the mix, and hopefully so will KU and K-State as they continue to improve their rosters.
It's always a fun ride, in the dog days of summer when you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for football season and then basketball season, and you got not a whole lot going on. It's hot outside, and then you've got some pretty high level basketball going on inside Coke Arena. I said it before and I'll say it again. It took me a while to get into the TBT because I thought it was kind of a novelty at first. And the longer it's gone on year in and year out, man, the more must-see TV it becomes. Being inside Coke Arena also is amazing. And watching not only the Aftershocks, but the other teams that, come in for the regional and just the fan support that's behind it. I mean, people get up for TBT, and that's awesome to see. The Aftershocks are 10-3 in their last 3 tournaments, which is incredible. Shout out to Zach Bush, head coach of the team. He's done a phenomenal job. You're right. Heartfire is really, really good. I didn't realize they're coached by LaFonso Ellis. And so that's pretty cool too. They were really, really good, and they forced a lot of turnovers on the Aftershocks. It just sort of, seemed to me that really the Aftershocks just could never get into a run to cut the lead to where it was manageable. They would get into a mini run, they'd make a 3, that sort of thing. And then Heartfire would just come right down and score on them and just extinguish whatever that run could have possibly been for the Aftershocks. So they ran into a really, really top tier opponent in Heartfire. But man, hats off to all of them. They did a great job, and it's really cool to see that support.
I thought they had a real good chance this year. I really did. And I wonder at what point they're going to have to sort of reset the roster to some degree. We'll see. But, TBT's in the books for all intents and purposes now. We probably won't pay a ton of it. Well, we won't here on this show. Like, we're not going to tell you about the Final Four now. But, good job. I love that in the summertime we get this. We were talking around the office, like, some of the guys were trying to like power rank Wichita sporting events and like where things line up. And, it was interesting to hear everybody's thoughts on where this comes in. I do think that people have begun to own it a little bit. I do think there's a little pride in these attendance records involved. It's all really cool. I think everything about it is cool. And, we'll keep, shouting from the rooftops the fact that we should keep the Elam ending and get this thing going the rest of the way. Just a real quick look around some headlines. There has been, I should say, interest in Shohei Ohtani. Teams are checking in. Man, we've got the trade deadline in 5 days.
It's coming up.
And it feels like we're going to have like 30 of these things all drop at once. It's really strange to me that we have not seen more from the trade world than we've seen so far.
A lot of teams that you would think might be sellers, they all won yesterday. And so and some of these teams are right on the fence. Like, it depends on how the series go this week. And I know the Angels are one of those teams. They're in the wild card hunt right now. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they keep winning this week that they don't move Shohei Ohtani. And I think that there are other players. The Cubs are one of them that they've got Marcus Stroman. They've got Cody Bellinger that I think they're listening to offers on, but I don't know if they're going to be willing to move them. Like, there are a lot of teams that are right on that edge on being buyers or sellers. The teams that we know for sure are going to be sellers, the issue is a lot of them don't have quality players to trade. So I think it's going to be a really interesting trade deadline.
I do too. I think it's going to stay a seller's market. And we'll just have to see how much of a seller's market and if that could benefit the Royals. They do have, I think, at least 2 attractive pieces, relatively attractive pieces in Barlow and Hernandez. And probably, Tommy, the longer we wait, the more attractive those trade pieces become and the more valuable that they are.
It wouldn't surprise me if Hernandez goes first. I think teams covet him, maybe even a little bit more than Scott Barlow. I think ultimately both will go, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Hernandez go first.
Both better go. It's not even a will. Like, you had better move those assets this year. It's taken too long anyway. It has to happen now this year. 869-1240. We'll come back. We'll tell you what's on tap today when we return on Sports Day.
Prairie Band Casino wants to know, how do you play? Are you...
that does it for us, everybody. Congratulations to our winners of our HTO Iced Tea giveaway, to our Wichita Wind Surge ticket voucher giveaway. Thanks for the calls and comments as well here on the show today. All eyes are on that trade deadline and the Royals, and they're going to cover us up today because they have a noon game against the Guardians. So you've got Jim Rome for an hour following us here on the show, and then the Royals, Guardians, and we'll just see. If any trade news happens, it could definitely happen during the broadcast. There's no question about that. Coming up tomorrow on the show, we will have our betting insider, Chelsea Messenger. We will have our K-State insider, Tim Fitzgerald, for you. Should be a lot of fun, as Thursdays always are. For Chad Chambers producing, Tommy Castor on the other side, I'm Jacob Albracht. We'll see you Thursday.
Sports, lighter news, and great comedy with Bob and Tom mornings. 97.5 and 1240 KFH. Wichita, always live on the free Odyssey app.
What's all this brouhaha?
Brouhaha. The number one